Sports presents Benning Bites with Damon Benning. Benning Bites with Damon Benning.
It's another episode of Benning Bites. Appreciate you fine folks being a part of what we're doing. Apple, Google, Spotify, however you do it. Glad you're a part of it. Always learning. I think it's important to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you are so you can always be a lifelong learner. That's a lot of our listeners, right? So, again, however you like us, make sure you consume us. Great show coming up today. It's a Tuesday, going up on a Tuesday. Coming off a great show, right? There's a lot we didn't get to that we'll get to today. You know, Nebraska baseball, Nebraska softball. We kind of alluded to a few things, but didn't get in depth with my partner, Andrew Rogers. Make sure you give him a follow at Andrew Rogers CC on Twitter with Coffee and Cream coming up next. I got into some amazing discussions with Andrew yesterday with Sam McEwen. If you didn't listen live, go back and listen to kind of what we talked about. A lot in there. And it just got me thinking, right? You know, Sam kind of went off on being stuck with bad comps. And that's a condensed version of, well, because such and such didn't pan out, then that means this is a case study going forward. Or to the contrary, just because such and such ran this, then that means that it means this going forward. And I asked him, and we even went into it with coaches with Andrew yesterday. You know, somebody asked him at the, I can't even remember whose concert it was, Kenny Chesney maybe, the other night. Well, is Matt Rule the guy, and how jaded we are because of, you know, Callahan or Bo or Riley or Frost. And I'm like, why can't we just stay in the moment, right? Just because player X from school X didn't pan out doesn't mean that the next player from school X will. Or just because such and such ran this time in track doesn't mean that they will. You know, we just went like trying to stay in the moment. And I just got to thinking, right? Because I asked Brady Oltmans about, you know, top guys in the state and across the country. And I asked Sam about national recruiting, and he talked about Raiola. And it was just interesting, right? Because with Raiola, the first thing that he said was, oh, you know, really good talent. Like his film. You know, he's one of the top quarterback prospects ever. You know what he didn't talk about? He didn't talk about his frame. He didn't talk about what he ran in track. He didn't talk about what he did on the baseball field. He didn't do any of that. He just talked about basically whatever he talked about football related. And it got me thinking with the conversation I had with Andrew and Coach Rule, where when somebody asked him at the concert, hey, is Coach Rule the guy? And it's, why do we have such a hard time staying in the moment? Like, why is it human nature to compare what we see versus where we've been or what we hear, right? Shannon Sharp said this, and I don't love everything Shannon Sharp says, but he said something the other day talking about basketball, and he said, you know, I see better than I hear. I say that all the time on this show. As lousy as my eyesight is, I see better than I hear. You can tell me anything, but let me watch you work. And so why is it with football that we get into all these other things? Oh, in track they did this. And cross country they did this. In the shot put they did this. Does any other sport do that? Any. In baseball, do we say, oh man, do you see the way they play tennis? Whew, that hand-eye coordination. Or in volleyball, oh man, do you see the way she hoops? Man, her concentration at the foul line. Did you see the way she jumped for a rebound? That is a direct correlation to what happens in volleyball. Or in baseball. Oh, my goodness. Did you see the way that they played football in the offseason? That has got... So why do we do that in football? I'm curious. This is on the heels of the Schaefer discussion, recruiting, hits and misses. Why are we so worried about all the things that aren't football related? Because here's a news flash for you. You ready? You ready? You ready? And we know this, and we fight it anyway. Hey, they ran such and such in the 40. They didn't run this in the 40. They ran such and such in the 100. How many times do we get to move in a straight line? Seriously. Right? How many times you just get to run straight with nothing in front of you where you just get to run a straight line? We don't talk about playing at 45s like I like to talk about with D linemen. Or even when we talk about get off, like 10-yard dash, it's like, hey, can you do that at a 45? Can you change directions? How much does knowing what's going on help you with what you're doing? But we just get mesmerized by it, which is why there are so many misses in the combines. Now, is there a certain level of baseline athleticism that you need? Sure. But why? Like, what makes football different? Right? Was Ronaldo Nehemiah, was he Bob Hayes? Or because we know that Tyreek Hill is fast, that means we like fast. But what makes Tyreek Hill different? Well, his ability to change direction in short area bursts. The ability to play at 45. Did Chiefs fans reconcile drops? Sure, when they were losing them. Oh man, how many times did he catch a ball clean? How many times now we want to bring up football. Now we want to bring up actual football-related ideas when it comes to evaluating. And you know what I arrived at? A lot of times it depends on how bad we want a guy. If we want a guy really, really bad, it's, did you see what he did in such and such? If we don't want a guy really, really bad, it's, oh, man, he's not this, that, and the other. Because for whatever the reason, even though it is the ultimate team sport, not the most difficult of the team sports, that would be baseball. But of all the team sports, the one in which you need everybody to be on the same page at all times more than any other sport is football. We still boil down to things that don't actually have to do with football. They don't. If I run a 10-900 meters, how many times am I going to get to run a 10-900 meters? If you want to use a really good example, a guy that was really, really fast. Do you know what made Amon Green good in the NFL? It wasn't his speed. Newsflash. It wasn't his speed. Because he was fast in Seattle. And he wasn't as fast in Green Bay. But you know what he learned how to do? He learned how to run counter in Green Bay and take better care of the football. So why, and I don't use Amon as a negative, I use it as a positive. Because you know what he never wanted it to be all about is his straight line speed. You know a guy that wasn't as fast, but arguably a better natural runner? That would be Lawrence Phillips. He's a 4.56 guy. Not overly impressive, relatively speaking. But it's about the things that come along with it. Is anybody taking Fabian Washington over Mike Brown? Fabian Washington, a much better tester. Mike Brown, a much better football player. Are they both sensational? Yes. But what are we looking at? What are we looking at? Joshua Kalu is still playing in the league. We weren't enamored with his testing numbers, but he was a really good football player in college. And he's not this and he's not that. Why do we focus on that so much? Because it's human nature. So what am I trying to do? I'm trying to empower you to be individual thinkers. Don't fall for the okie doke. Be a Berean. Do your own homework. Do these things sound familiar? Yep. They're things that DB says all the time. And it doesn't make it right, wrong, indifferent. I'm giving you new ways to think about things so you don't come across as frustrated. Well, we got two head coaches from the pros. We got Bill Callahan. We got Mike Riley. Okay. Those two things are true. Can two things be true at once? Does Bill Callahan or Mike Riley sound like Matt Rule? Yes or no? Only you can answer that question. But if they sound different, then don't lump them into the same category. If you were looking for leadership from one coach and not from another coach, and they came from different places, what is it that we're isolated on? Stay in the moment. Stay in the moment. I told this to 3 recruiters the other day. Right? And I'll use my guys because I'm not listen, I think credibility is important. And I said it 10 trillion times. I'd rather be right than well liked. Right? Christian Jones, 210 pounds, outside linebacker. Going to have 50 offers before he's a senior. 900 meters at 209 pounds, 210 pounds. That's fast. What do some coaches tell me? Oh, nope, not as sudden. Doesn't play that fast. Doesn't play that fast. Look at Teddy Rizak. Oh man, Teddy Rizak ran a 4.53. That's legit. Notre Dame they offered. Well, he looks 4.7 on film, 4.8. Look, I understand both. Both things can be true. But who are you as an evaluator? What matters? Only the individual can decide that. What I think we as the general population, because I'm not mad at coaches either way, but I tell coaches when they call or text or they're at our school, if you're going to use this to validate one and crucify another, let's us decide where we can meet in the middle. How about what we see on film? So I go back to the question. Is football the only sport that uses other things to validate productivity other than the sport? Yep. When's the last time you heard a guy evaluating hockey saying, oh, man, that Connor McDavid can skate his ass off. But he only runs a 4.840. Are you discrediting what Connor McDavid does on the ice? Why does that happen with football? And do you really believe track is a direct correlation to football? Do we? We say we don't, but then we kind of do, and then we kind of don't. I mean, Darius Haywood-Bay is fast. He's fast. Was he reaching the draft? Will Levis has a big arm. How much does having a big arm have to do with being a good quarterback in the NFL? Are there any quarterbacks that you like, that you subscribe to, that didn't have giant arms? Joe Burrow, Tom Brady, Joe Montana. They're not isolated examples. It's a lot of guys. There are guys that had some rockets. Dan Marino, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, Matt Stafford, Jeff George, Ryan Leaf, Achilles Smith. What are we talking about? I don't know. The lesson here is stay in the moment. Stay in the moment. It's like I tell teachers. Do I want to look at a student's file when they go from 5th to 6th grade, or do I not? Well, that depends on who's evaluating. If you're good enough to stay in the moment knowing a backstory, by all means, go ahead. If you can still blank slate a student after knowing what's been in the Rolodex, then knock yourself out. But if you can't, if you're incapable of blank slating or meeting students right where they're at, don't read the files. Don't. Well, such and such a student, every time they come to school, it's this, and when they're in this situation, they do this. Because then sometimes you'll go out of your way. I won't put them in this situation. I know it's the morning time. History says when they come to school, well, what if they're in a new environment? What if all of a sudden they're getting good breakfast? What if they got a good night's sleep the night before? Are you still going to hold it against the student that normally when they come in the mornings, they act a certain way? Well, I hope not if you're good at education. That's why it's important to meet people right where they're at. Stay in the moment. Don't judge people by how people tell you they're supposed to be. Judge people by how they treat you. It'll take a lot less of the stress off you. It just will. You don't have to worry about what such and such said and such did and what such and such didn't do. That's the same way I think evaluations happen. But I was just curious, and I say all this to say, why is football the one sport where we use other sports to validate productivity in a different sport? Humor me. Hit us up, 888-638-4876. Does volleyball use basketball? Does basketball use volleyball? Does baseball use football? Does hockey use tennis? Does golf use hockey? Where'd that come from, and why'd we get so gun shy about what our eyes tell us? I don't know. I'm curious. And why do we as a fan base and people in general fall into that? You ever hired a guy or gal that scored like a 22 on their ACT but was one of the best workers and problem solvers that you've ever come across? Or have you ever hired the 31 on the ACT that couldn't think their way out of a wet paper sack when they weren't in a controlled environment? So why does that happen? And yep, I know what you're saying. At DB, we need baseline data. That's why we have data. If a guy doesn't hit a curveball 70% of the time, averages are in my favor. That if I throw him curveballs in this kind of count, studies show. No, I get it. There's a difference between, and you want the money shot? You want the money muscle? If you're smoking meat and you want to cut that little bit off the pork shoulder, if you want the competition money muscle, understand the difference between best practices, which is data that you can arrive at, where you know that there's going to be some curves, some extenuating circumstances, some por ejemplos, some for examples, if you will, that don't line up with the data. There's a difference between best practices and being able to see better than you hear. Because where do we get the saying? When people show you who they are, believe them. Yet we always think that we are so self-confident to the contrary that we can change them one way or the other. You have to be able to stay in the moment. If you truly believe that the best form of future performance is past behavior, why do you teach? Why do you coach? You just look at prior history. There'd never be second chances. There'd never be redemption stories. The key is you have to be secure enough in your model of evaluation that you evolve and you roll with the times. Stay in the moment and blank slate people. That's when real development happens. It's another episode of Benning Bites.